It's an interesting, but we don't actually have any topics in the pad right now. Um, Anybody have anything they want up their head? I have one thing I can maybe talk about in here. Not a lot this weekend.
Yeah, just checking the pad. Yeah, it seems like we don't have any new topics for this week.
So there was one thing I thought I would bring up, which is I opened this pull request yesterday. Um,
Which one?
I'm about to copy it into the pad.
Okay.
About setting the OSD flags during upgrade. And so the thing I was thought maybe would be worth a little bit of discussion is um, how we handle sort of what flags are set and what we do by default versus what they have to sort of ask for. We'll say the way that I handled it currently in that pull request is I made the flags that you want us to set a config option. It's like a comma separated list, and then it sets them by default when you do the upgrade. And then there's a flag you can pass to the upgrade to not set any flags. And obviously you can change the config option to set like a different set of flags if you want or whatever. But that like the idea is put like a good default in, but you can change which flags you want if you want something, and then you could also just have it not do anything, not have any flags. The reason I did it by default, I originally was going to have it not do it by default, and then if um, they passed a flag, and then it would add them in. But the tracker actually specifically asked for it to be by default. That's from somebody who should know a little bit about this stuff. So
Yeah.
I went with that. So I guess I would just sort of open the floor if anyone has any opinions on sort of good ways to specify the flags or what we should do by default versus what they should have to ask for or something like that. As I said, I have it sort of the way I have it in there is sort of what I came up with as what I thought made sense. Um, which is it's one of the better ideas, especially for specifying which flags. As I said, the comment separated list as a config option is a bit awkward. Um, but I wasn't sure exactly where to put it either. I didn't want to have a different flag for the upgrade command for like every single OSD flag you want set. So what I ended up.
So these flags will apply to all the hosts in the cluster?
All the OSDs. So basically, like say for example the no out flag, it just means that none of the OSDs will get marked out during the upgrade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so I mean I didn't have to come up with which flags would be a good default. I took them directly from the tracker, which is I think looks like it was taken from Ceph Ansible. Let me. I'm supposed to share my. Yeah. So here I'll start writing stuff down. That's sort of where I'm at with it. Is I don't know. It just felt like a bit of a strange way of doing it, but I wanted it to be customizable. I didn't want to like force a certain set of flags. Um, I didn't really have a better way of doing it. I said other than just having like a separate flag for each OSD flag in the upgrade command, but I didn't like that either. I thought we just have way too many flags in that command at that point. So I went with this. So,
Does it make sense to pass some configuration file to the upgrade?
spec file for upgrade. Um, I don't know. I mean, it feels like kind of heavy for the upgrade command because I've never used those before. I mean, I guess it's when we have to compare it to, I guess, what I have in there right now, which again is the config option, like what is more or less annoying. I don't know. I feel like making a spec file for the upgrade might be actually harder than setting the config option.
Mhm.
Especially if you were okay with the defaults we have set up there, and you'd have to sort of still make a spec file for it.
Yeah, so that's my UX question, which is how often do you expect people to need to change these? If it's a rare case, then having a slightly clunky workflow is okay because you don't expect people to be doing it constantly. If you think this is something people need to tweak often, it might not make sense to have it in a kind of a side workflow.
I mean, it'd have to be no more common than upgrades, um,
Sure, sure.
which is yeah, I feel like already limited pretty a bit. And I imagine most people are going to have like an opinion on what should be set, and they would change it like once. I don't think it would be very
Hmm.
common.
Yeah, well, that's what I was assuming. I was assuming it wasn't something people would be tweaking a lot. Um, I do find Breto's idea about having a spec for the upgrade pretty intriguing, but for this, I think for now is probably okay, unless you're like, oh, I think 50% or more of upgrades will need this.
I do
The
agree.
spec for an upgrade thing is interesting in the case of all the other options that you might need to supply too.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if we got to the point where we had enough things in there, it would make sense to have like an upgrade spec. Um, but I know I'm also going to be looking into disabling the auto balancer, or what was the other thing called? The, yeah, the auto scaler. I mean, and yeah, the PG auto scaler and the balancer during the upgrade as well. Because again, there are also things that sort of mess with the OSDs, and because they're going up and down during the upgrade, it
Yeah.
can be a bit weird.
Mhm.
So maybe if we have all of those things, maybe something we would think about. There's enough things that it's worth having a spec.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm just, I don't know, I'm a bit like tentative on it just because it's not what we've done before, and we'd have to then like explain how to set up this new
Yeah.
spec file type for this. I'm sort of worried
I
about people
guess
like messing it up, not getting it.
my my only other question about this new thing is if people already have some of these flags applied, what happens post upgrade?
As it it checks if they're set. Well, so it doesn't. It checks if they're set, and if they're not set, it sets them during upgrade. I guess the one big problem maybe that we're going to run into, I hadn't thought too much about, is that if they had them set already, they wanted them still set after the upgrade's over. I think it
That's
doesn't
what I
look
was.
like them.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Maybe we have to be more careful about that. I mean, that's more of an implementation detail, I guess.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we should check if we actually are the ones setting them, and then not touch them otherwise. Hmm. I don't know. That's kind of tricky.
Yeah. Alternatively, you have to document something like, hey, if you have these flags set already, when upgrade's complete, it's probably going to clear them on you. So maybe they need to have like a completely clean cluster before they upgrade,
Yeah.
which
Or
might be a
they
good
could just
idea
pass.
anyway, but
Yeah, they could also just pass the. If they pass that flag that does not touch them, like it won't turn them off either. Like it just does
hmm,
nothing. So if you want to set the flags manually, you can just still pass that flag to not do it. And then we won't do anything. So it can be worked around pretty easily. But again, like the more problem is they have to like know about that.
right.
And obviously, like people don't always check not going to check, especially there for like if they've updated upgrades before, not going to suddenly be like, I'm going to read the upgrade documentation again.
Oh, yeah, I mean, you can't even assume anyone will read the documentation, but at the very least, when they complain about the mailing list, you can just link to it.
Yeah.
You don't have to come up with anything original.
Yeah, so that's why I was originally going to make this off by default, and you had to pass a flag to do it. Because then, like, if you pass the flag, you must know there's something going on. But so the tracker was recommending to do it by default. I think that is what Ceph Ansible was doing. I think it was setting these flags by default. Um, it's just that we probably should have had this maybe even earlier, and we didn't. But it's just I don't know. At least my concern is that it's been so long now that it's worked like it's worked that people might be just sort of surprised that it's different now. I mean, maybe something I don't know. Maybe something that just even if we do it, something to not backport. So we say like this is a major release thing because it also won't trigger and you upgrade to a version that has this change. It has to be like from. So if we waited until say like the reef release for this to actually hit an actual release, then at least it would be like a new reef feature. It's not like suddenly in your Quincy point upgrade it changes. And that's maybe somewhere where you'd be more willing to accept like, all right, this is a bit different. I know they're gonna have like release notes and stuff that people maybe pay a bit more attention to on the major releases. Maybe there's some incentive to not backport it because of that. I don't know. Yeah.
Here's a thought. Could you backport the mechanism but not the defaults so that the mechanism is there but not used on the older versions? And then on Reef or whatever, it's suddenly the defaults are different?
I
Maybe that's
could,
too
yeah.
complicated.
If I just made the config option that uses now a blank string, there would be no flags to set.
Yeah.
So I could do that. That's true. Probably a good idea.
I don't know what's easier.
I mean that change in the backboard would be very simple. It would really just be changing one string.
Yeah.
So technically wise, that would be very easy. And I guess it would move the mechanism there, but then it would have no actual change in the defaults.
All right.
And yeah,
So
we could
if
say
someone was like, "Hey, desperate, I need this," and you could say, "Okay, well, it's there," and then, like you said in the release notes, you could say the defaults are now blah blah blah, bringing us in line with the previous behavior from Ceph Ansible.
that makes sense. Yeah, I kind of like that. I might go for that. Yeah, I might have to go for that. I kind of like that idea because we don't surprise anyone with anything because it won't actually do anything unless you know about it and you set something on the minor releases, and then on the major release we can have like we now set these flags and these like release notes. And again, I think because it's a major version, people are more willing to accept things changing. That's where you expect there to be more significant changes. So that's fine because that's what we're also doing with like say like our secure monitoring stack stuff that all relies on like moving like Prometheus service discovery from like our old style, and like that's why we didn't want to backport that. We thought it'd be too surprising for a minor release to suddenly change that stuff. But this is what you're talking about actually happens to work, where you can have the feature be there but not do anything by default in the backport. I think actually is probably the best option.
Probably we should save the status, then restore it back after the upgrade.
Yes. Well, what it sort of tries to do is it has a set of flags that it's going to set, and it makes sure they're set before it starts upgrading demons. And then as the upgrade completes, it tries to unset all those flags. So we do have the one problem that if you had those flags set before, it will unset them.
Exactly.
I don't know how
That
big a
would be
problem
so
that is, but we were sort of wondering, like, that's what we brought up earlier, is like, I guess should we just document that that's there, and then is it okay if like we're only doing that in a major release, so it's a change there?
It could be surprising to the user if we change the flags, so I expect people complaining if we change something they had.
Yeah, that's sort of why we were saying like maybe only have this happen in brief, because I think in a major release, like maybe that's like a change like that would be more acceptable.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're messing with the flags a little bit here. Whereas in like that in a point release, you're just upgrading a point release, you don't expect there to be anything super significant, and so they would, I don't know, maybe that would be a bit of a bigger deal. But I'm not sure how much of a use case that really is, where people just like have no out set all the time. Maybe there's something wrong, I don't know, with their OSDs or something.
Yeah, because imagine like you have some OSD out, and then we just recover it after the upgrade, and the cluster starts using this OSD, and it was marked out before the upgrade.
I don't think setting the flags would help with that, because that would be a problem. Is you'd actually want no out off at that point if you want the OS to be marked out.
I mean, like if we are able to save the status and then restore it after the upgrade, that would be great. So this way, at least we restore the same status the user had before the upgrade.
It's probably possible. I know. So one of the things that it does when it's going to the loop to set the flags, it doesn't just try to set them all because it is idempotent, so it could do that. But it doesn't have to do that. It checks if they're there first. So we could do that like initially, and then save that as part of our upgrade state, like what the initial state was, and then sort of diff that against what we need to set.
Yeah,
That's probably possible. I think it's doable. We think that it's like it's too risky to unset people's flags at the end of the
exactly.
upgrade.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm okay with that. I think I could take a look at that and see how doable it is. I think it would actually be pretty easy. It would just be one extra thing we have to store um, in the upgrade state, and then at the end
Yeah.
we just basically not do unsets if we saw those flags were in that like initial list that we picked up.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's all I had about this pull request. I just want to ask a couple questions about it because it was doing some weird things by default now. Or not weird things, but doing things that are different from what it was doing before. But I kind of like both of these things we talked about. Maybe the restore thing is probably good, and then the backporting, but without the defaults, is probably nice as well. Bring the feature back without actually changing any behavior by default. So I'm happy with that. So that's it I have for that. Does anyone in here have any other topics they want to talk about in here?
Yes, and just a small heads up if you don't mind.
Okay.
Hi. So My name is Gautam, and I have been in this meeting before, but I'm not a frequent attendee. So I work on the on OpenStack Manila, and we had some open trackers, and this was us testing with the Ingress and the Ceph NFS service about, I mean, a few months ago or something, like about last year, more like. And so we realized that the Ingress service was actually preventing client restrictions to be applied on access rules, so on exports that were generated by the Ceph NFS service. And so we were working with the NFS Ganesha developers to kind of come up with a solution to this, and they've gone ahead and implemented the HA proxy protocol. So that would allow the NFS Ganesha to actually see the client address that's the real client address instead of the ingress address that it currently sees. And that would allow the client restrictions to work again. So that's a little bit of background of the things we were looking at last year. And so now we have some NFS Ganesha builds to play with. And I think it's time to go back to Ceph Ingress and do some experiments. So I just thought I'll come here, give you a heads up, Adam, about a couple of trackers. Let me just paste them into the pad. So the first one there is the NFS Ganesha issue that tracks the proxy protocol implementation. It's not closed yet, and that's because we're still testing this stuff. And I mean, there's a PR that's linked out of there, and there is the Ceph Adam tracker. Just move that below. So it's basically to use the work that was there in NFS Ganesha. We need a config option to be set, and that's detailed in this tracker 58933. And the config option is HA proxy underscore hosts, and it's basically the ingress IPs, or I mean, if there are multiple, the IP addresses of the ingress service, so that Ganesha can know that the request is coming from an HA proxy and can look in the header for the actual client address. And in the ingress service itself, the HA proxy config would need to have another value, which is to send the proxy protocol header, and that's detailed as well. So this is, I think, the changes that we'd require to kind of integrate the solution completely.
Okay. I want to summarize. So there's two changes we need. There's
Yes.
in the HA NFS configuration. There was what was that thing called? The setting we had to set, like HA.
In the ingress config.
In the NFS, there's one for NFS, one for ingress, right?
Yes, one for the HA proxy config that the ingress service has, as well as the NFS Ganesha.
So NFS was like something called like HA proxy host. What was the thing called that we had to in this tracker?
It's called HA proxy host, and I think that's link 4 on the tracker that you have.
Let me just pull it up. Link 4. And then in the, I assume it's the HA proxy config.
Yeah.
You need something as well. Is that also one of the links to the tracker?
Sorry, I cut you off there.
Oh, so is the stuff for the HA proxy config also one of these tracker links?
Yeah, it's in the same tracker. Did you want me to create a separate one?
No, you don't have to create a separate one. I'm just trying to like summarize all the things we have to do to make this work, just so it's written down.
Yep. So I can give you an IP. A different link there. So it's a single line called send proxy v2, and I'm just trying to find that. So we currently have, I think, the server address and some other annotations. Maybe check, but let me find that in the Ceph Adam the Ceph repo and link you there. But I suppose it's a minor change.
I mean, if we just have to change a couple configs, and yeah, this sounds pretty straightforward. More about like testing it and stuff, just to make sure it works.
Yes, and that's kind of what we were trying to set up for right now. Like we actually reached out to somebody internally in the Ceph team and checked if we can get a build with the NFS Ganesha packages that showed up on. They're currently pushed out to CBS. So we can pull from there and get a Ceph build, and we can set up a environment to test this.
Pretty sure from some past stuff we did that at least the main branch of Ceph uses like the most recent Ganesha builds.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if we read the backport these sort of things, it might. I don't know what Ganesha versions those older branches are using, but if we can do this on main, and it'll just pull the latest Ganesha. So as long as it's in the most recent version, we can test it there.
I see. I can figure that out and probably ping you with that.
Okay. But yeah, this is not super complicated. Just they said because we used the most recent one, we could technically. I should be able to just make a pull request against main that makes these sort of configuration changes, and then we can sort of see how it works.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll add that in. Okay, and then this other one about the port stuff, is that part of, this is a separate issue, right?
So we've this is another thing that we may run into, and we're not entirely sure. So it was a separate issue, and we've discussed this here in the past. So it was the aspect that we wanted to run NFS Ganesha on port 2049, and that was because we have no mechanism in Manila to signal the exports port. And so clients expect to be running on the default NFS port there. And we can customize the port. As we can see, I see there are options to do that when setting up the NFS service. But the NFS Ganesha team thought that the RPC bind would actually be advertising the actual NFS Ganesha port and might prevent prevent us from mounting on that 2049 port.
I think what I remembered before from this was the point was that they're both binding the port 2049, but one of them is on the virtual IP and one of them is on the host, so it should work in theory. But I think I remember we found out was that when we check for port conflicts in CephVDM, we just check on all IPs. Like you check 0 to 0 to 0 to 0, and so there's always a conflict. Yeah, I think. Yeah, so I know this one. I think we have someone else who was going to look at this, who's trying to get into more CephVDM development, was checking this one. So this one we will figure out, but I just wanted to confirm that this is not going to block any of or shouldn't hopefully block any of like this proxy stuff. This is just like a separate issue.
It is a separate issue, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I think we have somebody who's looking into that. But I might try to do this HA proxy configuration stuff first, and then we'll get back to the port issue after. So I think this is the bigger thing actually, is this, because you can just configure around the port stuff if you really want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is something that you have to change. So right now there's no way to really get these config options set. So that's more important.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, so it sounds not too bad. It sounds like you already have all the links and stuff to what we have to do. So I'll take a look at that. See if I can make a test pull request to change those things and see how it goes.
Great. Thank you. That's all I had.
All right. anyone have anything else on that or any other topics? Nope. All right, in that case, we'll call it here. Get a half an hour back. Yeah, we'll end, and thanks for coming. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Awesome.
Bye.
Thank you. See you next week. Bye.